book of Leviticus in Hebrew is called Vayikra, meaning "and he called." In today's podcast, we're talking about the importance of God's call on our lives and the best way we can respond to him when he calls. I'm so blessed for this opportunity to come to you in another Portions podcast. We're starting the book of Leviticus together, but don't shut this off because you somehow think Leviticus is going to be boring. Not with my buddy Nathan in the house. Dude, I'm thrilled about jumping into the book of Leviticus. And I think Leviticus is such an amazing book that we can easily overlook because of what it appears like on the outside. But maybe you can start us off by telling us what the book of Leviticus means in Hebrew. And then let's just jump in from there.
Yeah, so Vayikra is the portion, but it's
Vayikra,
which is also the name of the book Leviticus in Hebrew. So we use the term Leviticus, but Vayikra is the name of the book. And it means, and he called.
And he called. So with that as a foundation and as the title of the book, I'd like to talk about the importance of the call of God.
Yeah.
Because look at this. Let's just look at Leviticus 1:1. Then the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him. That could seem a little bit redundant. It could have just said, then the Lord called Moses. Or it said, then the Lord spoke to Moses. But he called and then he spoke. There's something so significant to me, Nathan, about the call of God. Because I think that the call of God, which we don't have to respond to. The call of God and then God speaking is contingent on how we respond to his call. Some of us might say, I haven't heard God speak to me in a long time. My response would be, are you intimately connected? Have you responded to his call? So I feel like we're supposed to go back and just look at the original call of Moses, if I can. Do you have anything that you just wanted to say before we do that?
Yeah, I would just say that I fully agree, but there's the opportunity each of us has to respond to God's invitation, right? He invites.
Right.
But then to your point, we don't have to respond. But if we don't, we're missing out on a tremendous blessing. So his calling is there. What are we going to do in response? And I think not only does the book of Leviticus take us through that, but we see that bear out just in our relationship with the Lord every day.
Every day.
There's an invitation, but will you show up? In previous portions, we talked about the willingness of a person to respond. Back when we were talking about in Exodus. So we play a role. It's God's grace that does it, but we have to respond.
We do have to respond. And that's kind of remarkable that the Lord is looking for our response, which is exactly what happened when God originally called Moses. I mean, we don't have to rehash the entire book of Exodus, but we know that Moses at 40 was the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He was like maybe second in command. He was like the guy, not second in command, but raised in Pharaoh's house. I'm thinking of Joseph, who was second in command. Moses, who was a significant figure, 40 years old. He knows he's called to be a deliverer. He goes out, he kills the Egyptian, hides him in the sand. It becomes known. He's then sent to the backside of the wilderness for 40 years. I'm thinking Leviticus 1:1. Then the Lord called to Moses. Well, that original call actually is Exodus chapter 3. And I just want to go there for a minute. And I feel like this is really going to be an encouragement to those who are watching and listening, because the Lord is looking, like you said, for our willingness when he calls. So let's just go back. We'll look at the call of Moses. Maybe we'll look at the call of Abraham, call of Isaiah. And then we'll just kind of sum it up with God calling us and how he calls us. And then we actually can call on him. And his response to us is the same thing that he's looking for when he calls us. So look at this. Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, Exodus 3. backside of the wilderness, verse 2. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. Moses looked, behold, the bush was burning and not consumed. Verse 3. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight. Verse 4. The Lord saw that Moses turned aside. God called. God called to him from the midst of the bush, said, Moses, Moses. And then here's the big word. It's the word of the day. It's the word that we're going to focus on. Moses said in Hebrew, Hineni, here am I, which I contend, Nathan, is the only real response that men and women can give to the call of God, because Hineni is two Hebrew words that are kind of joined together. Hine is behold, and the word ani is me. Behold me, or as it's interpreted here in our scriptures, here am I. And the interesting thing about saying, here am I, it's really like telling the Lord, look no further, I'm your guy. Remember John the Baptizer? He says, behold the Lamb of God. Jesus shows up and he says, behold, turn your eyes this way. Yes. Here's the guy. So when we say, behold me, we're telling God, look no further, I'm your guy. I love that. Or gal, but guys for here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's the interesting thing about saying Hineni. When we say Hineni to God, we're saying, here I am. Say whatever you want, I'm going to do it. It's like we're volunteering without knowing what we're volunteering for. And that's really, to me, the sign of somebody willing to answer the call of God. Because when God calls, our obedience should not have anything to do with our convenience, how it benefits me personally, even though it will ultimately benefit us. But Moses said, Hineni, here am I. And that is huge because, look, if I said, hey, will you volunteer? Mm-hmm. You might say, depends on what I'm volunteering for. Yeah. If you're smart, what are we doing? What are we doing? But if you said, sure, I'm your guy, that implies a couple things. Number one, you trust me.
Right.
And you know me, and you know that I would never ask you to do anything that you couldn't do. So here, and God called, Vayikra. When he called Moses, Moses said, here I am. And you know, God then asks him to do something that's absolutely crazy and ludicrous. 80-year-old man, Moses, you're the guy that's going to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt.
Wow. Man, to think about this, Scott, we get an opportunity to say yes. I mean, that's really the role we get to play.
Yeah.
We can say no, but if we will give God our yes, then we are unlocking this whole new realm of possibility because it's God's invitation and he only invites us into beautiful things. Doesn't mean there's not challenges, doesn't mean there's not hard work, but he's inviting us into a beautiful story. And it really presses on the thing you just said. Do we trust him? Mm-hmm. Do we trust that he's for us and not against us?
Yeah.
Because if we do, we can give our yes pretty quick. We can say, Hineni, here I am. And if we don't, we tend to be a little more reserved and we can miss out. And God doesn't put us in the naughty chair and put us in the corner. But we do miss an opportunity to experience the beauty of the Lord revealed in the power of saying yes.
Yes.
And yes is a powerful word. And so there's the invitation to respond to the Lord's call. And when we do, man, I mean, I've experienced it. You've experienced it. I mean, this Hineni message is kind of a life message for you because I've heard you share at different times what all it means, even in what you're doing now with Together for Israel. There's just this, here am I, Lord, what would you have me do?
When we say yes to the Lord and follow whatever he says, there's no limit to what God can do.
Yeah.
But typically, as with Moses, when God gave him the instructions, it was an impossible task. Right. Moses, who was forgotten, no longer really known to the children of Israel, he's been absent 40 years. Right. He's a shepherd. He's got his little staff, tending sheep, doing the lowliest of jobs. And then God shows up really when Moses probably least expected it. Because when Moses said, here am I, God says, you're going to go. And then Moses says, who am I? I mean, you somebody else. I'm 80. How about, think of the call of Abraham. God called Abraham when he was in his, in Genesis 12, he called Abraham out of the Ur of Chaldees to a land that I will show you. Abraham says, I'm your guy, I'm going. Yeah. But then in chapter 22, when his son Isaac, who was literally life from the dead, he couldn't have been birthed. Sarah was beyond the age of bearing children. Abraham's body was as good as dead. Finally, the promised son comes, and many scholars think Isaac is at least a teenager when God calls him in Genesis 22. I'll just flip over there really quickly. And it says, Genesis 22, it says, now after these things, God tested Abraham and said, Abraham, Abraham, you know what Abraham says? Here am I, Hineni. And then God says, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, and offer him up on the altar in a place where I shall show you. Then God calls. And what ought our response to be? What ought our response to be? That doesn't even sound right, but I'm just going to leave it where it is. I do make mistakes. What ought our response be, to be, should be? What should our response be? Woo!
What should we do?
When God calls us, it has to be, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, Hineni, here am I, look no further. And then whatever he says, we've got to be willing to do it. I'm reminded in John chapter 2, that's what Mary told his disciples at the very first miracle that Jesus performed, no wine at the wedding. She says, whatever he says to you, do it. Yeah. And many times that call, it might not correspond with our own intellect. As a matter of fact, it might go against our own intellect. You're my guy. You're going to deliver me. You take your son, your only son, offer him up on the altar. Whatever he says to you, do it. They did not need water at the wedding. Right. Jesus had filled the water pots with water. But when we respond, when we say Hineni, God moves mightily.
He moves mightily, Scott. And you know, God's not asking us to feel qualified. He's not asking us to look into our bag of tricks and see what we can come up with. He wants us to trust him. Yeah. And it is signing the check before the amount's filled in. It is this issue of trust, but that's why it pleases the heart of the Father. Right. Because he's like, do you trust me? Yeah. And will you present yourself to me as one who will receive the call and respond? And I think too often we can measure our response based on our own estimation of our ability. Mm. You know, Moses could have said, he does do that. I don't speak well. Yeah. I can't, I'm not the guy for the job, you know? But finally he's able to surrender his heart and say, okay, Lord, you know what, here I am, whatever. Yeah. Abraham, there's all these reasons why it can't work. Yeah. But God, if you would call me, I mean, that's really the beautiful part. It's coming to that place in ourselves saying, okay, if the Lord is putting this out in front of me, I've got to trust that he knows more about me than I know about me, and that I can trust his provision to give me everything I need to fulfill the task. We just finished the book of Exodus. We talked about Bezalel, and we talked about how God gave him insight, wisdom, understanding to craft these beautiful things. God gave him his spirit to empower him to do the thing that God was asking them to do. Yeah. We need these pieces built for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. So I'm going to put my spirit in these people to be able to do it. So God, when he asks us, will you go with me? Will you trust me? Will you respond to my call? Yeah. We have to trust that he is going to equip us with everything we need. Yeah. Right? It's what Peter says in the New Testament. He's given us everything we need for life and godliness according to his precious promises. We've got to trust that he has either already given it to us or will give us what we need to fulfill that yes. Yeah. And he does it so faithfully, Scott.
So what would you say to people who are listening or watching who've been saying, Nathan, Scott, I've been waiting. Yeah. I've been waiting for my burning bush. I've been waiting for God to call me. I feel like I'm just going through my mundane life. How would you encourage them? Yeah. What can we do in order to feel like God's calling us.
Yeah. So there's two parts to that in my mind, Scott. So yeah, we want to hear the Lord's voice. We want to know what we're supposed to do. I don't want to just start something and hope it works out. I want to hear his voice, but there are things he's already told us we're to be doing, right? Yeah. So until I have that, I really feel drawn to start that business, to ask the girl out, to, start that ministry, to go, those things that God can feel that invitation for, we say, Hineni. Until I have those moments, then I want to be faithful in the things that he has revealed for me to do. Good, bro. Man, let's be faithful in the serving, in giving, in honoring people, and opening our homes, treating people with hospitality, kindness, care. God has given us clear things. We don't want to just be sitting on the couch waiting for God's call. Yeah. We want to be active. And my wife's a fitness instructor. And so one of the things they talk about is called active rest. We've done this hard bit of work, but now we're going to rest, but I don't want you to sit on the couch because we're going to do some more work. Yeah. I may just have you walk around a little bit. We're resting, but you're active in your rest.
I love it.
So we're waiting on the Lord for maybe that call that maybe they don't know they've heard yet. Yeah. But in the waiting, don't sit on the couch. Let's continue to do the things we have clearly been given to do in Scripture. Yeah. Exercise it with gratitude and trust the Lord to speak.
I love that so much. So the word Hineni, it's throughout Scripture. Abraham said Hineni to God. Moses said Hineni to God. Samuel, as a little boy, said Hineni to God. In Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah says Hineni to God. All of them said Hineni without knowing what was going to come next, but a willingness to say, whatever you say, I will do it. We're talking about God calling man. But have you ever thought about man calling God? That's kind of a remarkable thought. Who are we to call God? And God called. Book of Leviticus, Vayikra, God called. How about man called? Check out this one verse, and then we'll bring this to a close. Isaiah chapter 58, an amazing chapter on fasting and getting your life right and God's chosen fast. Look how the Lord responds in verse 9 of Isaiah 58. Then you will call. What? We're so desirous for God to call us. Maybe he's waiting for us to call him.
Absolutely.
Listen to this. Then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry and the Lord will say, Hineni. What? We say Hineni to God. We're saying, Lord, whatever you say, I'm going to do. Then God's saying, you will call. Yeah. You, human little dweeb, me. I love how you were looking at this. You will call me, the creator of heaven. I blew you into existence. You will call me and I will say Hineni to you. That is remarkable. Because when you say Hineni, what you're saying to God is don't look any further. Yeah. Whatever you say to me, I will do. When God says Hineni to us, he's saying, look no further. Yeah. I'm your guy. Yeah. I'm your God. Yeah. Whatever you say to me, I will do. And then you start thinking of these verses, ask whatever you will in my name. Yes. And I will do it for you. But that's not some selfish dweeb. Right. No. It's somebody. By the way, I don't know that I've ever used the word dweeb before. Certainly not on camera, and it's been twice in the last 30 seconds. God cares about answering us in the same way that he desires us to answer him. When he calls and we say, Hineni, I'm your guy, I'm your gal, whatever you say, I will do. And then God answers Hineni to us. That means, Nathan, when you call to him, his response to you is, here I am. Whatever you say, I will do.
Yeah. Many people will know Jeremiah 33. It says, call to me and I will reveal to you great and unsearchable things. He wants us to call to him. Yeah. But listen, we get his ear when we say yes to him.
Yes, we do.
When we say yes to him, then he's like, okay, if you're all in, I want you to know I'm all in.
I love it.
And we can trust his leadership, Scott.
I love it, Nathan. Fantastic. Listen, as we dive into the book of Leviticus, it's being communicated to a man who said, Hineni, here I am. God called, he answered. And I want to encourage you, whether you're in the midst of a mundane, seemingly mundane kind of life, thinking that your life is not amounting to a whole lot where eternity is concerned, God is waiting. Your burning bush is coming. Moses was doing the most menial of jobs, tending sheep. And God called out because he saw Moses' heart as a faithful son who was willingly doing everything that God put in front of him. When we say Hineni to God, here am I, God says Hineni to us. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to coming back to you next week with another Portions podcast.